Hi, everybody. It's Susan here, and this time we're looking at Jupiter moving into Taurus, which is happening very soon, day after I'm recording this. I'm a bit late because I was away for the weekend, and I'm planning on leaving for my first holiday in a very, very long time, much needed, which is pretty Jupiter in Taurus in and of itself. And so I've just been incredibly busy, and my little brain is starting to weaken. And so I've written down a whole bunch of things so I can remember all the different things that are quite significant about this transit. And keeping in mind that this is something that will create a kind of an imprint for the next year, a little bit more than a year. When we look at an ingress chart, it's kind of like the natal chart for a planet moving into a sign. So here we've got Jupiter at 0 degrees of tropical Taurus. We're not going to be too bothered about the house placements for this chart. If it were a natal chart, that would be extremely important. But nonetheless, the symbolism is very interesting because it just happens that with the Greenwich sort of London time, the universal time, that gives us an ascendant in Scorpio, and that puts the nodes on the self and other axis, all about relationships, but of course still in the energy of money. And Jupiter in Taurus representing everything to do with abundance, just like Taurus itself. And there's a lot of resonance between Jupiter and Taurus, for good or bad. So it's more of all of it. So just like Taurus, for example, Jupiter represents, of course, abundance and wealth and money and, all those kinds of things in general that sustain us, everything that supports us and keeps us kind of alive and well. That includes our family ties. Taurus represents the family, second house of our family networks and connections. It's also representing nature. I see the environment in the third house in terms of the environment around us. In terms of nature, for me, that's second house, and Taurus represents that. But in terms of the environment, when we're thinking in terms of green things, then that's still Taurus. What else? And then, of course, it's including food as well. So Taurus is all about food and the sensual pleasures and enjoyments of life, and so is Jupiter. Jupiter loves the abundance of entertaining and really indulging in all of the good things. But in a much more esoteric way, or a higher minded way, we could call it, Jupiter is about wisdom. And I see quite a lot of significance here in terms of where we need to draw our attention in terms of our wisdom. It's also faith. We'll need a lot of that these days, I'd say, as well. And it's also growth and optimism. Abundance is not only in the material sense, but abundance of faith is a really interesting expression. If you think about Jupiter as providing a sense of a soft landing, let's say, even in difficult times when things are really, really challenging, there's somehow always a place that we can go to that allows us to feel it's going to be okay. When we've lost that place, then we really need to have help. Then we really need to find other people who can give us that soft landing. And that might be a Jupiterian figure. It could be, for example, a teacher, which is a Jupiterian figure. In the Indian astrology, Jupiter is known as Guru, the one who removes the darkness. Gu meaning dark, and Ru is the root word for the removing of the darkness. And the heaviness. Guru means heavy as well, substantial. And so those figures, whether it be a teacher or it could be a minister or some kind of priest or a rabbi or somebody that you go to, a spiritual person that you go to for good counsel. That's what you need when you have lost your own sense of Jupiter, when you've lost your sense of faith. Forbearance is another word I like for Jupiter. Giving us a steadiness and a sense of it's going to be okay. I just have to keep going through this and we'll get to the other side. And where Venus, which is ruling Taurus, is kind of more human justice, our social justice, if you like. And I don't mean that in the modern sense. I just mean the justice of society. Jupiter is the higher justice, it's divine justice, a sense of overall why things are the way that they are, and not trying to seek out in this lifetime anyway necessarily the answers to why something might be the way it is, but just to understand that there is ultimately a right and a wrong. There is such a thing as right and wrong. And Jupiter is also just pure dumb luck as well. But I have to say that it's really important, although it's considered the greater benefic, and say Venus, for example, the ruler of Taurus, which is now ruling Jupiter, she's the lesser benefic, meaning that she brings the more mundane, sensual pleasures and the enjoyments of life and the money and all those things that are very pragmatic. Jupiter is benefic in the sense of the more the fullness of life, including our spiritual side, including our higher mind. It's a difficult phrase, that higher mind. I don't mean to imply that there's some kind of hierarchy there, but just the sense of a bigger picture mind, which is not quite consciousness, because the sun represents consciousness in the planets, but it's certainly an awareness. It's what you could call discernment, viveka, this wisdom that is innate in all of us if we can clear the space to let it shine through. But just coming back to that sense of Jupiter as the greater benefic or the pure dumb luck kind of thing, it is really dependent on your natal chart. So it's not because Jupiter is moving into Taurus that you're going to all of a sudden like tap into wealth and abundance and great sex and relationships of all kinds. It's just not the way that works. Some people will say things like, I have had Jupiter going through the best part of my chart and nothing happened, or bad things happen. But you have to see, what is the natal promise? What is Jupiter like in your natal chart? What's the dignity? Where is it placed? How is it affected by other planets? All of those things matter, because if you don't have a chart that supports marriage or children or financial abundance, for example, it's not going to happen just because Jupiter rocks up into Taurus. So we have to be realistic. This is, again, that's that kind of cookie cutter astrology, which is quite damaging to the image of astrology, because it turns it into this kind of easy peasy kind of, this happens, therefore that should happen. And then people say, you see, it didn't happen, but it doesn't work like that. So we have to keep that in mind. There's always this caveat that Jupiter will only give you what your natal chart is here to allow you to experience in this lifetime. And I have come across people who are, they feel that there's something wrong with them because they're not successful in relationship, or they're not successful earning money. And when you can tell them you're really here to experience other things, this time, this life around is really for something else, it actually can come as a relief, because it's not to be seen as a personal failing. It's to be seen as something that you're here to develop in this lifetime, that is a genuine quality, something that you can really benefit from and really feel at the end of a lifetime. I've really done something that I appreciated. I've really learned something and got to know something. So in that sense, let's stop thinking about Jupiter like Santa Claus. Let's stop thinking about, what can I get from this? So asking instead, like, what can I learn from this time of, for example, Jupiter in Taurus, and any time Jupiter moves into anywhere in your chart, and wherever Jupiter is natally in your chart, the what can I learn from this is the big question. So it's not what will I get, how can I benefit from this? Especially in that material way. And if that is the case, you might find yourself extremely disgruntled, and you might even find that you're kind of sitting around in expectation of something, which means that you're prevented from actually taking action when you need to be taking action. So don't think either that if Jupiter's going through Taurus, I don't really need to do much, and I'll get the benefits of that anyway. I have heard this far too many times, where astrologers say, this is where you're going to get benefits. No, we still need to do something. We have to get up off the couch and get out the door and and seize the opportunity, because Jupiter is really more that. It's opportunities. It's not like you're just going to have stuff raining down on you, like it's Christmas Eve or something. So you don't always get what you want. It's an important life lesson. Sorry, sorry, Virginia. There is no Santa Claus, and this is something that you want to understand in terms of the shadow of Jupiter, which is greed and entitlement. And that feeling entitled is that aspect of Jupiter that prevents you from actually experiencing the wisdom opportunities of Jupiter. Which is, for me, that's the most important part of Jupiter. It's where can we grow? What is the higher purpose of this? And again, I hate that expression of higher, lower, and all that stuff. But what is the long-term picture here? What is the benefit to all concerned? And why not even turn it around and say, how can I uplift others through this feeling of abundance and this feeling of wisdom that comes from this double expansive energy combining Jupiter and Venus? How can I use my generosity of spirit, for example? So we're very quick to think, what can I get? What's in it for me? And actually, the greatest joy and the greatest sort of healing energy is to be giving. The act of giving, the act of generosity is profoundly healing. And often people who are depressed are not in generosity. They're not in they're more in their own awareness of self, a lot of focus on self and their own needs or their own lack, what they think they need, what they think is missing, let's say, and not enough on focusing, what could I do for another? And ultimately, we're all here to be doing things for each other. Once we reintegrate that sense of community, life just feels so much better. It just feels so much more abundant. And even without extra money, we just feel like we have extra resources. And resources, that's a big word, in fact, for Taurus. That's one of the significators of Taurus, is resources of all kinds. That includes your social resources. Who's there for me? Who's got my back? So can I live through my highest values? Taurus is also about values. And Jupiter is about the understanding and the knowledge and the wisdom of living a righteous life. And that's not about dogma. It can be in the shadow side of Jupiter. It's not about doing it one way, not another. It's about living through what is righteous. There is, like I said at the beginning, a right and a wrong in this human existence. And each spiritual tradition will describe that differently, but it boils down to the golden rule, which is do unto others as you would have them do unto you. It's kind of that simple. And so we want to avoid collapsing into self-indulgence with this energy, because it's very easy with Jupiter in Taurus to become extremely self-indulgent and preoccupied with greed and so on, which again Jupiter represents. It's think of that big, the kind of cartoon image of the big fat cat, corporate energy, big belly, arrogant, entitled, wasteful. So Jupiter can be all of those things too. Extravagance. A Venus-ruled Jupiter can be very extravagant. So for some of you, this can also be that you're overdoing it. You're overdoing the consumption, or you're overdoing the spending, or you're overstretching yourself financially. So we do need this wisdom aspect of Jupiter to stay in the space of growth with purpose, growth which is not about instant personal gratification. And we need that for all of us. We need that so that we're living a life perhaps more simple. Taurus, paradoxically, Taurus can also represent simplicity, even though it's all about these sensual pleasures and enjoyment and so on. But it's also simplicity. And so it kind of comes down to this dichotomy between entitlement and simplicity. So this cycle of Jupiter as it's going into Taurus happens to also coincide with the energy of the cycle of Jupiter and Pluto, which also in turn coincides with the cycle of Jupiter and Saturn. So where Pluto is currently at the time of this ingress, and it has been since March of 2023, it's the point at which Saturn and Jupiter met in Aquarius in December, on the 21st of December 2020. And that created a whole new cycle. The Saturn and Jupiter cycle was always the big social cycle. Before the outer planets were discovered, that was always the way that the bigger cycles of time were measured. And that was the beginning, let's say, ish, of the air cycle, the 200 years of air signs. Although there was one in the 80s where they coincided in Libra, I think it was. But nonetheless, that cycle is now being stimulated again. This time with a square between Jupiter and Pluto. Pluto has come into the space where Jupiter was. What is that, like 2.5 years ago or so? And now Saturn is going to be in sextile with Jupiter. So that's actually the opening sextile. Once Jupiter reaches 7 degrees, Saturn will be there at 7 degrees, and they go into their opening sextile. So I'll speak a bit more about that. So this is quite a symbolic moment, because we're into a new energy of relationship between these planets. And Pluto is kind of coming to that point and saying, so what are we going to do? Like, what's this next 20 years going to look like? And we can already get a feeling, because we've had that cycle since December of 2020 to think about. So there's been quite a lot going on since December 2020, and we've now got a great sense of what this cycle represents. And now that Pluto's going into that point, we're able to examine it through the lens of the Saturn and Jupiter cycle. So as I mentioned, Jupiter enters Taurus on the 16th or 17th, depending on where you are. So it's like in the evening, about 20 past 7 in the evening, Greenwich Mean Time. So that's the universal time. That means that in the US and Canada and South America, it's on the 17th. But everyone eastbound of the UK is on the 16th. And so this is an energy of something quite different. We haven't had this energy for 12 years. It's softer than Jupiter in Aries, because now we've got a Venus-ruled Jupiter instead of a Mars-ruled Jupiter. And it's ruled by this quite nurturing Venus. She's in Cancer, quite a nurturing energy, somewhat conservative as well. So for the moment, the bling bling is kind of tame, maybe more self-indulgent emotionally. Maybe it's more about the, chocolate cookies kind of indulgence, rather than the, when Venus moves into Leo, the handbags and sunglasses kind of indulgence. And then Venus in turn is ruled by the moon. So there's and what's interesting is Venus, not only, she rules that Taurus, and is now ruled by the moon, but the moon is exalted in Taurus. And so we can call the moon the exaltation ruler. And then there's another interesting tie, because that moon is in a mutual exchange also with Mars. Mars is in Cancer, ruled by that moon. Moon is now, as Jupiter goes into Taurus, ruled by Mars. So there's a big tie-in here, what we could call love and money. And with Chiron on the moon, maybe we have to call it, healing, love and money. Sabotage around love and money. Sabotage is another word I like for Chiron. Self-sabotage, particularly. And also, what action might we need to take based on what we need personally, what we need to nurture ourselves. This Mars is in a sextile to the Sun at the time of this ingress, and that's energizing. It's an energizing, action-oriented kind of quality. And then speaking of action, so we've got the Pluto squaring Jupiter. This is often something that is quite powerful It squares exactly on the 17th of May, although it already is, and then it continues for a good week. So we're already in orb of that, and then it continues for a good week in a really powerful orb. That can be really helpful for envisaging, like planning new your future, planning something new, big plans, not just like what should we do tomorrow, but like what the hell are we doing with our lives? Um, Planning money, planning around money, planning around social, sustainable social projects, for example. Um, it can also provoke tension, between a need or a desire for material security, which is represented by that Jupiter, and the need for radical change, radical social change, to be able to sustain our environment and our food systems and our what sustains us. What sustains us needs to be sustainable. That kind of goes without saying, but these days that doesn't seem to occur to a lot of people, particularly our rulers. This can also be a clash with rulers. It's a clash of values. I see it like that. It's a clash of values, um, that we need to perhaps speak up or take action on, and especially because now, soon enough after this ingress, we're getting Mars moving into Leo, and that will be on the 20th of May. But it's approaching, fast approaching a T-square. So it's already what I would certainly call a strong opposition to Pluto. Let's call it a square anyway, for the sake of it. But it's going to be exact on the 20th. So this is powerful change, action required, something new. Social, well, again, that word revolution, something very, very different and new needs to come in here. Pluto is going to expose hypocrisy here with this aspect of Jupiter squaring, and especially with Mars triggering that. Hypocrisy will be exposed. This is not just collective. We can't let ourselves off the hook as well. So where do we hold ourselves or others to a double standard? There's so much judgment, and so this is the judgment is the lower or shadow side of Jupiter. It's dogmatic. It imposes its opinion. You have to believe what I believe. How dare you think that way? Who are you to think that way? You must be a bad person if you don't share my beliefs. Holy cow, are we ever in the thick of that? So that's going to be something that can be triggered and exposed. Where can we recognize our own inconsistencies? Where are we holding double standards? Where are we holding others to these impossible standards, to double standards? Where is it okay for your hero, your favorite person, to make mistakes or break the law, but it's not okay for people you don't like to do the same thing? We need to really look at this collectively and individually, because it's really like a cancer in society. It's an absolutely destructive energy. So this can also be major financial and political adjustments. So really big time financial adjustments, and particularly at the end of May. We're going to have 31st of May, roughly, depending on where you live. But anyway, the whole last week of May and pretty much the first week of June, we've got Jupiter conjunct the North Node, opposing the South Node. Again, that's going to be exposure of lies and misdeeds, secrets, and so on. And then Jupiter on the North Node, I see as something that's going to be really expanding economic change, especially because we're still in orb of the square at that point. It's going to be at 3 degrees, so a 3-degree orb for an important transit like that is well worth looking at, because it's going to be so powerful. Mars will have moved on by that time, but Venus will be close to that degree point, and then the square becomes all about Jupiter squaring Venus, which is going to be roughly at the end of Cancer, where Mars is today, and at the time of the ingress. And then Venus will move into Leo to stay for 4 months, and keeping in mind that Venus is ruling this pile up here in Taurus as Jupiter moves in. I think it's safe to say that until October 8th, when Venus finally gets out of Leo, that we are really going to be heavy in the thick of reassessing economic issues, our values. Values are a really big name, big word here. Values, values, values. What do we value? With Mars, when it's going to be in Leo, for example, we've got the courage to explore where we need to take action based on our savings and income and wealth and values, especially where they don't align with our leadership. It's going to be a really, really big time for assessing the quality of our leaders. Are they operating from the values that we want? This is North Node. We need something new here. We need something to change. So it's a volatile moment in time. It's quite volatile. These mutual receptions are helpful. The Venus and the exalted moon, and then Mars and the moon helps to support the energy of balance. But once they move into Leo, that's no longer going to be the case. Then we have solar ruled Venus and Mars, and that's a far more energetic, far more potentially even ego-driven energy, which is not going to be as soft as the Cancer, or as sort of mitigated as the Cancer energy. So at the time of this ingress, it's money and security issues are going to be very, very prominent, and I do think that's going to be the essential focus right through till the spring, till I think it's the 24th, 25th of May, when finally Jupiter leaves Taurus. And keeping in mind that Taurus is the 6th house of the United States chart, the Sibley chart, which that tends to be my preference, because it just lights up with all major things. And the 6th house represents armies and judiciary. It's not the courts, that's the 9th house, but the 6th house is like the lawyers and judges and so on. And keeping in mind, Venus, of course, rules justice. So that's 6th house. This is what makes the Americans so litigious. And so we have Jupiter going into that. That is also about workers, like workers of all kinds, laborers, soldiers. It's the army. Jupiter going in there is maybe going to also show an expansion in all of that as well. And more concerning is the preparation of when Jupiter moves into Gemini in May, late May of 2024, and Jupiter in Gemini in the States. That's the 7th house of relationships with others, which are typically fraught in the US. And that often represents war. When Jupiter goes through Gemini, almost without fail, the Americans go into hot wars where it's not so much the covert ones that are ongoing, but so again, get those values talked about. We've got Mercury here at the point of the eclipse. Mercury's at the 5th degree, which is where the eclipse was on the 5th of May. Get talking about those values. Tell your leaders what you want to see in the world. Virtually nobody wants this kind of violence. Like, everybody is feeling like they're being bulldozed into this kind of violence and aggression and discord, in disharmony, in the world around us. And we need this disruption, this disruptive energy of Pluto. Mars opposing Pluto, that can be very, very violent. Even it can be a flashpoint of violence. But with Jupiter there, I mean, on a mundane level, Jupiter North Node can be all about the money, but it can also be about what's just, what is wise, discernment as opposed to judgment. That's what I was going to earlier. It's my Mercury in Pisces that kind of swims all over the place, but I was going towards that discernment compared to the sense of judging and evaluating others. So this is a very important energy, I think, very stimulating, possibly something that can bring us a genuine benefit, and it can't be a moment too soon. These are crazy, risky times that we're living in. So yeah, I think this applies very much collectively to all of us, but we have to stop thinking in terms of, oh, that's about all of us, and therefore I don't have any role in this. We have to also always think we're a fractal of the larger whole. We are a piece of the collective, and every action that we take, every single action, every single thought that we have contributes to the energy around us. So things like, ethical issues are going to become huge with Jupiter squaring with Jupiter on the node, which is all about values and ethics, squaring that Pluto in Aquarius. So that's very much going to be about transhumanism and AI and all of these things that are becoming so powerfully, since that beginning of the Jupiter-Saturn cycle in December of 2020. This is the thing that we have to grapple with now with Pluto for 20 years going through this. What do we do when the AI becomes so powerful that we can no longer make a plea for compassion? Computers and AI don't have compassion. So far, as far as I know, I might be wrong. Tell me in the comments. Yeah, so that period around May 31st and 1st of June is going to be a big one. This week in general is a big one. The moon is going to be moving into Taurus, just adding to that. Any child born now is going to have just the most insane stellium in Taurus. Be fascinating to see what those people will end up doing. But as long as Jupiter is in Taurus, Jupiter is ruling, Jupiter always rules Saturn. It's not just because it's in Taurus, but from Taurus, it's ruling Saturn as a sextile because Jupiter rules Pisces. And so that's a very supportive energy. That can be actually a kind of a reality check. It can be a check on the excess and extravagance that can otherwise be there. So it's kind of a limiting factor. Not limiting in the sense that nothing can get done, but it's limiting in the sense that you've got to make a bit of effort. Think of it as like the welcome adjustments are coming through your effort. It's not going to be without effort. And that especially is in the case of the next couple of months ahead, while Jupiter is going to be in the orb of the sextile. Later on, it's no longer in that orb. Once Saturn retrogrades, they move out of each other's sextile orb. But if you think about this, it's still going to be the Jupiter ruling Saturn. As long as that's there, it's going to be a sign-based sextile, which is much more harmonious than this otherwise awkward energy of Jupiter being in Aries compared to the Saturn. Jupiter and Saturn rule the last 4 signs of the zodiac. They rule. Jupiter rules Sagittarius and Pisces, and Saturn rules Capricorn and Aquarius. So they're constantly balancing each other out. So we want them to be in this kind of harmonious energy to give us a hand, give us a leg up. And it's especially true for the social or sort of collective areas of life. So this is very beneficial, very, very helpful. And that is especially going to be useful when Venus starts showing off up there in Leo. Because she's going to be, of course, ruling that Jupiter plus the stellium there in Taurus, which can be a bit of a pileup in terms of self-indulgence and extravagance. So those 4 months of Jupiter being ruled by Venus in Leo will need the wisdom, let's call it, of the Saturn in Pisces, which is a lot to do with wisdom as well. It's about trying to embody spiritual understanding, embody the sort of invisible qualities of life. And just again, as a reminder, Venus is there in Leo from the 5th of June until the 8th of October. So quite powerful for that Jupiter. And then there's going to be a reckoning when Venus moves into Virgo after that. That's Cinderella. You get home from the ball. So the ball is here. Venus in Leo is Cinderella in her lovely glass slippers, and then she's got to sweep the chimney when she gets home. That's the Venus in Virgo. So there will be a reckoning. So from sort of October through early November. But we'll talk about that in the future. Let's not go there. It's too far away. Anything can happen in the meantime. So just in general, because we've got, Taurus is an earth sign, so all of the earth signs are going to benefit by triplicity. So that's, Virgo and Capricorn are going to benefit from this lovely trine that's there with the Jupiter in Taurus, and the water signs too by sextile and by even the opposition there. This is Jupiter after all, so opposition from Jupiter is still beneficial, and of course sextiles to Cancer and sextile to Pisces, very beneficial. So the water signs and the earth signs are very, very fortunate, and the others will be grappling with something that is not too challenging, because we are talking about Jupiter after all. But it does, I think, in terms of the squares, or in conjuncts, quincunxes, if you like, it does show up as or semi-sextiles, which are also uncomfortable energies. It does show up as something that requires a little adjustment, and that usually is better done from a place of your wisdom and your worldview, rather than thinking in terms of material adjustments. That's where you're going to get the greatest success, let's say. So there's some really interesting synergies as well that come up with Jupiter through Taurus. It's on the 11th. It's going to go into the shadow of its retrograde, and Jupiter will go retrograde on the 4th of September. And that is exactly the same day that Venus is going to be stationing. So the 11th of June, we've got Jupiter entering into the shadow, and then we've got Venus retrograding. And then on the 4th of September, we will have Jupiter turning retrograde, and Venus will be stationing direct. Like, how crazy is that? It's pretty awesome. And it is part of the cycle of Jupiter and Venus, but this is exceptional because that's the ruler here. In this case, the Jupiter in Taurus, this is going to be much more interesting. And so I do think those are important things to pay attention to. That 11th of June also is when Pluto stations retrograde. No, not Pluto. When does Pluto station retrograde? No, sorry, it was stationed retrograde already. So Saturn, the 11th of June. Pluto stationed retrograde already around the time of the midpoint of the eclipses. So Saturn is stationing retrograde on the 11th of June. You see, I need a holiday. My brain's, I can't hold all this information anymore. And it's the sextile will perfect, because Saturn retrogrades at 7 degrees, and then Jupiter will have achieved those 7 degrees on the 19th of June. And so that's when the perfection of the sextile is, but it'll already be well in orb from now until then. So this is, as a reminder, that's part of that cycle of when Jupiter and Saturn met up at 0 degrees of Aquarius. So that's the opening sextile here. And what was called the grand conjunction at 0 degrees of Aquarius. And this is the only sextile between them in this phase. So often it happens that they sextile again and again because of retrogrades, but they won't have that because of the nature of the degree points here. So this, again, is an opportunity I see as an opportunity to stabilize some plans and definitely put some higher, more long-lasting values on important decisions. But this does require some kind of action. Otherwise, it can just be a kind of a missed opportunity. It's a pleasant but missed opportunity. Sextiles are an opportunity for grace. It's change with grace, adjustments and effort, but with grace, with a sense of I know why I'm doing this. This has a purpose. If we move into 2024 from here, we got Jupiter conjuncting Uranus on the 20th and 21st of April 2024, depending on where you are. And that's a pretty unsettling energy. So we've had Uranus in Taurus since May of 2018. So that's already been 5 years of Uranus in Taurus. So we've been completely shaken up in terms of our values, in terms of our green credentials, and in terms of our sense of what's going on with our food and our environment and so on. And Jupiter conjunct Uranus is can be upheavals around justice, for example. But it can also be, it typically signifies scientific breakthroughs as well. Like ChatGPT, although it's become kind of in the public awareness only in the last year or so, but ChatGPT was actually invented in 2018, around the time that Uranus entered Taurus. And thinking in terms of Taurus as speech, communication through speech. Taurus represents the throat and the voice. And so that's interesting that Uranus and Taurus gave us ChatGPT. And so when Jupiter joins up with that, I suspect we're going to see a powerful either resolution or need for a resolution around things that have to do with the ethical and legal implications of all that. And then, of course, the security implications, Taurus being security as well. So this is all coming up in the spring in a very big way. The spring can be quite volatile. Not that we're not already living in volatility. So yeah. So this is going to have, I think, very big implications. This Jupiter, it's going to be at the 20 degree. I think it's 21 degrees. Is it 21? I'm sorry, I can't remember off the top, but it'll be in the later degrees. So for those of you in the third decan of Taurus, that can affect some of you personally. So that would be anybody, like if you were born, let's say, between, what would that be, sort of the 15th of May until the end of the sign, so 21st, 22nd of May, depending on when that leaves. Or maybe even from the 12th of May onwards. But anyway, we'll talk about that in the future. I don't want to go in all different directions. But already as of March, we do have new energies because Jupiter is going to retrograde at 15. Keep in mind, 15 is a big deal degree in 2023. Jupiter will retrograde at 15 degrees when it does retrograde in September, on the 4th of September. And then it goes back to the 5-degree point. So again, we come back to touch where Mercury is currently. So look at what issues people are talking about now, what people are communicating about, what is being legislated, for example, now. And we'll see a resonance in September. And so that will, once then Jupiter again crosses that point of the 15-degree threshold, that's going to only be in March of 2024. So from now until March of 2024, we're only dealing with the first 15 degrees of Taurus. So if you're in the first 15 degrees of any of the fixed signs, or the earth signs, or the water signs, this is going to affect you really profoundly. A little bit less so for the others, fire signs, much less so. Which doesn't mean it doesn't affect other placements in your chart. If you've got other personal planets, for example, or points in the chart, that will affect those. But so we're only getting to 15 degrees, which is kind of crazy. And then from March of 2024, we finally get new energy. So it's really only March, April, May of 2024 where we're going to have a fresh Jupiter in Taurus, where there's something that is going to be quite new, and that will include the conjunction with Uranus at that time. So I think we're in a period right now where we're still kind of covering old territory. We're certainly still covering the territory that Uranus has already crossed in the last 5 years, where Jupiter's going over that and going, really? Really? Like, really? Adding a dose of wisdom, probably, I'm hoping. That's my wish anyway. That's kind of my fantasy. And then in May 23rd of 2024, then Jupiter will conjunct Venus, which is its ruler, in Taurus, while the moon is there too, which is kind of cool. This is it's so nice to find really nice energies. One can only hope that shows up as somebody's wedding. So if you're looking for a wedding date, depending on your chart again, choose the 23rd of May. 2024. That's going to be pretty awesome, pretty auspicious. So plan your holidays and plan your marriage, or some kind of indulgence. Go away, weekend with the girls, Venus. And then Jupiter finally leaves Taurus on the 25th, And then it becomes a sign-based square with Saturn. And that's going to perfect at the end of 2024. December 24, then Jupiter will become square to Saturn from Gemini into Pisces. And so that's for another time. Let's not think about that now. We have to survive these times to get there first. But yeah, let me just leave you with this thought again about the quality of Taurus representing speech and Jupiter representing wisdom. Think especially because right now Venus is in very nurturing Cancer. This is an opportunity to be kind. It's an opportunity to speak with wisdom, speak with indulgence. Why not assume better intentions rather than always assuming the worst, you know? And another thing is also, if you're emotionally frail, if you're very fragile and somebody else's opinion of you devastates you very easily, when you're easily triggered, you're very vulnerable to manipulation. So what we want to look at here is this quality of Venus ruling Taurus that says, let's just be nice. Let's get along. Can we look after each other? We're just one big family, Venus and Cancer. It's just one big family. Yes, we have our flaws, we have our fights, we have our frustrations. We need to transform things. But yeah, it's just be nice. We can do that. We can be kind. We're not like separate blobs of flesh dotted around the planet. We are dependent on each other. We have to wake up to that. So that's the wisdom of Jupiter. The ultimate wisdom of Jupiter is to know, and this is why Jupiter is it's ruling Pisces and it's exalted in Cancer. It's to know that we're interconnected. It's to know that we're dependent on each other. We can't be separate from nature. We can't carve out a chunk of land and say, I can do what I like with this chunk of land. And we can't carve ourselves out and say, I can do what I like and to hell with everybody else. Being like that causes enormous struggle, enormous strife. So there we are. Don't take life personally. It's not personal. We are all in this big boat together. We are all here together. Don't take life personally. Life is inherently impersonal. And you can't learn. So again, Jupiter is about learning. It's wisdom. What can you learn from this? You can't learn if you are offended all the time. If you're easily triggered, if you're easily offended by an opinion, if you're so fragile as to be offended and thrown off by opinions and beliefs of other people or somebody else's way of expressing themselves, get over yourself. Get over yourself. You need those people too. We need each other. So that theme of Scorpio Taurus is, especially the Scorpio end of it, it's also about manipulation. And as I said, if you're easily offended, if you're easily triggered, you are just being manipulated. Your emotions are being manipulated. You've lost control. You need the mind to, the mind is like the action-oriented part of what we are aware of. And Jupiter is, if you could think of it as the higher mind, it's the awareness, or the sun being the consciousness. It's understanding the mind. We see the mind. It's not who we are. Manipulation being a Scorpio theme, keeping in mind how emotional that is and how irrational that is. The passions come from a lack of discernment, which is Jupiter. So there we are. Be nice. First and foremost to yourself, but don't forget that you are a fractal of everyone else. You're a fractal of everything else. And so when you're nice to yourself, you'll be nice to everybody else. And a happy person is a person who spreads joy and happiness. And this is the jovial attitude of Jupiter, and especially so in Taurus. So I'll come back later in the week and I will do a video for all the different signs. I just don't have the time to do it all in one go right now. But I really wish you an abundant and wise passage of Jupiter through Taurus until the 25th of May, 2024. So best wishes and love to all of you. Thank you so much for being here, especially if you've listened this far. That means you're a diehard. So thanks for being here, and I'll see you in the next video.